Hey everyone. Hi Thora.
Hey, hi Gax.
How are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you? What is
I'm
this?
s- I'm so good. I'm so good. I'm so excited to be here doing this
Yes, me
workshop.
too.
Awesome. All right, everyone. So today we're going to talk about how to get set up tracking your next release. And Thora and I are big nerds about analytics tracking, so get ready. It's going to be great. I'm going to share in the Twitch stream our resource page. You can follow along there. You can check out the Miro board and watch with us there. And you can find other resources there for after the workshop. So why don't we just get started with a couple introductions and then we'll dive into what we're going to cover today. Thora, do you want to just say briefly who you are?
Yes. So my name is Thora. The Icelandic way is Thora. If you know Icelandic, then you can do that. I do customer success at Avo. I've been with the company for a while. And previously in my previous life, I was a data scientist and a product manager for different companies. So I have lived and breathed product analytics since 2014, and I am here to how do you say it? Now I have an Icelandic, really great Icelandic saying in mind, but I can't
Doesn't
translate it
translate.
to English. No, but
That's
I'm
okay.
here to share everything that I've learned in the past, and I'm excited to see what people think and challenge what we say, and yeah, participate in the stream in the comments.
Thank you for being here, Thora.
Thank
Um,
you.
I'm Lex. I come from a design background, but along my journey of design, learned how important it is to have good data so that you can make better decisions about product and design. And so I've become very invested in self serve analytics and have managed that for several companies, big and small. And now I'm working with the team at Avo on the community side. So if you're new here, we have a community called The Right Track. This workshop is a part of that. And you can learn more at the link that I shared, therighttrack.avo.app. And again, you can follow along there during the workshop. So why don't I share a little bit about what we're going to cover today. So we're going to start by talking a little bit about tracking principles, how to think about what you want to track. We're going to dive into a couple examples from Airbnb and Netflix. And Thor and I are going to talk through some considerations, how to think about what you might want to track when you're planning your next release. We're going to look at naming conventions, an exciting topic for those of us very into analytics.
I mean,
And
I
then
love it.
and then we're going to go back through what we defined and actually choose events and properties. So by the end, you'll know how to think about what you might want to track, how to name it, and how to actually come out with a set of events and properties to work with your team on. I wanted to just mention for folks that you can chat with us in Twitch. Hello. We're there with you on Twitch. And then also, if you're in our Slack, there's a channel workshop tracking, and you can hit us up there with thoughts or questions all throughout the stream. All right, let's get into it. All right, tracking principles. So when we think about what we might want to track as we build product, it's really important that we think about analytics as a system, that we don't just sort of like send data in and hope that it will yield insights, that we actually have a system that we're building along the way so that it's easier for us to both implement tracking in the first place and read the data, make use of it later. So we have a few principles here we wanted to go over. And Thora said she could talk about this all day, but we're going to try to keep it short.
I'm
The
not, I
first,
promise.
the first one is track what matters. Some folks will default to tracking everything, right? I've heard that before. Aren't we just tracking everything? And I think both Thora and I agree. You don't want to track everything. Why not, Thora?
Well, if you track everything, then you're going to get lost in all your data. So what I usually recommend is try to strive for tracking meaningful data. So you decide what questions you're going to answer before you decide what you're going to track, instead of just tracking all the buttons, all the page views, everything. Actually figure out what are the questions we're trying to answer, so you can structure your data in a meaningful way, and also you don't have so many data points that you just totally get lost in. And it's also expensive to track data that you don't want to that you don't have any need for, because all of these analytics platforms, they charge by volume. So many reasons.
So many reasons. I love that. You forget that it's expensive.
Yeah.
So I think of it the same way. I like to think of, if I knew this piece of information, what action might I take off of it? And if the answer is nothing, then why track it? So
yeah, exactly.
Life is short. We don't need to track everything. So here's a little example from Webflow's navigation bar. So for the Webflow team, they definitely are going to get meaning out of, are people starting the process to sign up for Webflow? Are they signing up, right? So clicking on this button or getting started, that seems like a meaningful thing that they might want to know. Did people click on the cookie policy, which is a legally mandated thing that they have to do? Not that meaningful, because if they knew that information, are they going to remove it? Like, what would they do with that information, right? Of course, you can make an argument here that you might want to track anything in the navigation. That's certainly an argument to make, but I think it's an important conversation to have with your team.
Yeah, at least make a decision about everything. What am I going to use this for? And if you can't think of anything, don't do it. You can, like, it costs a lot of time also. Like, you have to invest time into tracking thing, and developer time is very, very valuable. And to have a developer track a bunch of data that's not meaningful, and the probability is going to be high if they're going to track so many things. The probability is going to be high that they're going to make mistakes. So it's going to be buggy data anyway. So rather prioritize what is meaningful for you. Yeah, that's my take on it.
Amen. And then you're looking at your stream and it's just like boom, 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 boom. And it's like, no,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and Alex is saying clean up the events that turn out not to be useful. Absolutely. Looking through deprecating events, it's a really great practice. All right, our second principle here is tracking for humans, not computers. We see this a lot, and Thora writes a lot and speaks a lot about developer and product collaboration. I think that this is a key thing for product folks and engineering to collaborate on. How do you think about your naming in a way that's graceful in your code, but also is going to make sense in your data set?
Yeah, exactly. And the thing with computers, all the different programming language, they have different preferences. So like when you are going to track for computers, then you are always tracking inconsistency for the different computers. So in the end, there's going to be a human reading this data and trying to understand this data. Do it for them.
Do it for the humans. Yeah. And so we want to strike a balance between, something that's scalable and graceful for the team, but then also thinking about how much can this piece of information make sense just by looking at it, right? You don't want to rely on documentation too much.
Exactly. Like, have the like the name of the event, for example, have it descriptive of what the user is doing, not exactly maybe what they are interacting with. So what is their intention? Are they trying to start a sign up like they're trying to start a sign up, but they're not clicking sign up button 3, right?
Yes.
They don't
Yes.
care about what sign up button is. They have like an intention like, oh, okay, I like this product. I'm going to click this button. So they are starting their sign up process.
Exactly. And I think data can be really abstracted from users, right? You can sort of forget that there's humans behind it when you're looking at it. And so naming it in a way that is very conversational, that is more close to the way the user's thinking about your product, I think helps your team as well, sort of get into that mindset, what they're trying to achieve.
Definitely.
So we have a great example here on top. app.rum.spal. It's getting cut off. It's too long. Ming recorded. Any guess of what that means, Thora?
I'm gonna guess it's something about an app and something about a recording. I don't know what rum is or spell or ming. I'm not sure. I'm not a native English speaker, so maybe I'm missing something here.
I'm not sure what it is either. I think that it is tracking time on page in a very complicated way. And it's so long that it's getting cut off in the preview. So something to consider as well. And then down here we have product viewed. What do you think product viewed is?
I think someone is actually viewing a product. Is that possible?
Yep, I think that could be what's happening. So that's a little bit clear. We like that one a little bit better.
Yeah, I have a strong preference towards something like that. This could be like if you wanted to make it more literal and more literal. It could be. No, I can't think of an example, but you could make it. I'm not talking to you, Alexa. You could really make viewing a product more literal. Now I'm blanking on this. Bad example. Let's continue.
So are you talking about like in an e-commerce flow or something like that?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about what would be a bad event name for the user action of product viewed. Yeah. But now I can't think of it.
And I think also like another consideration would be, what's the space in which you're working in? So are you product viewed a digital product or is it physical goods? And if so, you might want to name it closer to like outfit viewed, right? If you're doing maybe a fashion brand or something like that.
Yeah. And also what I think is important is that you follow kind of the language of the company, because in the end, your coworkers are going to be using this data, and ideally, a lot of your coworkers, less technical ones, are going to be using your data, and then you want to speak their language. So, what language do you use when you're talking about your product or your different UI elements or whatever? I really highly recommend using that language instead of me recommending to our customers or whoever is asking for advice. I don't recommend you have to use these words. Rather, like, what are the words that you use, and then try to fit that into a good naming convention.
Yeah, and that brings us to our last tracking principle here about tracking to grow and reusable tags.
Yes.
So how do you know if something is, you named these something clever, Thora, how do you know if something's too broad or too specific?
Yeah, are you talking about the shallow and fat events? Yeah. So there is of course a balance, but I lean towards fat events. So the distinction between these two, having shallow events, then you have a lot of events that are really specific to each user action with few properties. But then on the other side of the spectrum is fat events with a lot of properties. So they are more general names of the events that you're naming, but you have a bunch of properties where you can slice and dice and narrow down on specific use cases. And of course, you can be way too broad, but I lean towards the fat event approach. For example, this is really relevant to what we were talking about before regarding user actions. You want the events to be descriptive for the user actions, not specific to what button the user was clicking or something like that. So, an event can describe a bunch of different elements that the user is interacting with, but still their intent is the same. Um, like my best example is, when you can configure something, your profile, you can configure some settings or something like that. People tend to have different events for all of these configurations that you can do, like username updated and profile picture updated and all of that. Instead, what I would usually recommend is to have like a profile configured, and then you have user properties. No, not user properties, event properties describing, what I was interacting with. But, in the end, I was just updating my profile, right? We don't really maybe care about every single thing. So that is an example of a fat event. Now I've talked about this for way too long. Like, you have to stop me if I'm rambling.
I'm into it. And you can often in your analytics tools set those up, right? If you decide I really do want to see the profile, you change the profile feature, right? You do some special release on that. Maybe you want to name that using that same event property setup. So we have an example here. On the top, again, really long, very specific events. Click submit, sign up form, visit page with a lot of detail. That's going to be a no. That is erring on the too specific, right? Naming every single thing. And then on the bottom, something that's maybe a little bit more sustainable. Closed onboarding, opened onboarding.
Exactly. Like these examples, they just contain a lot of event properties. Like the event name contains event properties that I would do. So for example, like there's a visits page, sign up form, click submit. So this sounds like there is some user interaction, and it doesn't maybe matter where it happens because it's always the same intent, but where it happens, that is super relevant in a property, right? So you don't have to, like in the end, if you want to see how many people, I don't know, you even know what these events mean, but in the end, when you're trying to understand how many people did this user action, you're going to have to add all of these events together and find all of the events that are relevant for this user action.
Yeah, right. It absolutely makes it more difficult to search.
Another example that I want to take for this thing, what was the name of the third?
The third track
yes,
to grow.
The track to grow. Like one pitfall that I see so often is when people use Boolean properties way too much. So we talked about this earlier, Lex, but Boolean properties, they are an indication that there are only two options of something that you can do. It's like has profile picture or something like that. But then if you use Boolean properties, then you're excluding a third option. And often, you start with two options, then your product grows and you add more options, then you add more Boolean properties instead of having a nice little string property that describes all the options that you have. So that's another thing. Boolean properties, they don't scale very well. So I usually push people towards, what if you would add a third option? What would you do then? And then, we do a string property.
More strings. I think that is a great tip. It's something that I had not heard before. I love these actionable tips from Thora. Okay.
Yes.
she's seen, I know she did this in her intro, but she's seen so many tracking plans, the good, the bad, the dreadful. Yes. So real expert we have here with us. So appreciate the tips, Thora. All right. So again, just wanted to mention that if folks have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. And or thoughts. Alex is saying implementing fat events. Implementing fat events is a bit more complex. Yeah. Thora, do you have a reaction to that?
Yeah, I mean, that is true. Now I'm not a developer, so I usually just like, hey, here's a fat event, go implement it. But I can see that how that is more complex because you are working on this button and you just add an event for this button instead of having to think about all the other scenarios that apply to this user action. So I totally feel your pain, Alex, and sorry if I've asked you to implement 2 fat events.
If that's a personal dig. Yeah, no, I think ultimately what we're talking about is having that conversation with your team, right? Like what makes
Yeah.
sense for your product, what makes sense for your code. And I
Yeah,
think,
and there's definitely a balance there. 2 fat events is definitely going to be too difficult to implement, and I would not recommend pissing off your engineering team and making them mad at you for defining 2 fat events. So, like what I usually preach, this is a collaboration between engineering, between product, between data, and perhaps other stakeholders, and they should be everyone has an opinion, and if engineering says like this is too complex to implement, can we split it down to 2 or 3 events, then of course have that conversation with your team.
yes, love it. It's all about the collaboration and conversation.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so now we're going to move into choosing what to track, and we're going to use Airbnb as an example. Airbnb is one of my favorite examples to use. I think it just has a nice level of interaction that applies to a lot of different products. And so we're going to pretend that we work at Airbnb and that we're doing a new release. And the new release is a brand new calendar redesign. We think that, the last calendar wasn't working great to get people to book reservations. So we've added a new layout here with the goal of getting more people to book stays at Airbnbs. And so we're defining the tracking for that release. And what we're going to do is we're going to go through and do a pass at what we want to think about, how we want to measure success. And then we're going to go back through and define our actual events and properties. So why don't we get started? Any considerations before we jump in here, Thora? Or any
Yeah,
framing?
so like what I usually like to do, and I usually recommend to teams, is to like I said earlier, to think about the questions that you want to ask before you decide what to track, so you are tracking meaningful data. And we have framed it as a purpose meeting, where you are actually aligning your team on the purpose of the feature that we're doing. What are the problems that we're trying to solve? What are the goals that we're trying to achieve? What are the metrics that we want to or need to measure to be able to measure success? And like I usually even recommend going down to metrics and encourage people to think about how are you going to visualize this in your analytics tool. So if you're using Amplitude or Mixpanel or anything like that, how is your graph going to look like? And what events are you going to need to be able to build up that graph? That's basically, in short, what I usually try to do, because otherwise you're going to end up with a bunch of events that you don't need, and maybe don't have the events or properties that you need to answer the questions that you have, right?
Yeah. I definitely have found thinking about that end state really helpful. And I've even set up those views or tried to and said, oh, I'm missing an event. Maybe we need to instrument that. I think that's really a helpful way to think about it. And for me as a designer, I also think about it through like the critical path. What's the critical path that I'm expecting the user to take to get to the goal?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm thinking about what are sort of the touch points along the goal journey. And so we're gonna think about that for Airbnb. All right, so we know that our goal is to measure how many people are booking a reservation based off of our new feature. So what's the first thing that you think we should be looking at, Thor? How should we approach that sort of metrics journey?
So usually, what I try to do, and it sounds like it's similar to what you do, is to think about what is the desired path, what is the funnel that we want our users to go through, and what are the steps that we need to be tracking to see, like, okay, where's like a critical drop off. So first step, obviously, you land on the page. We need to track that. And then through the funnel, what are the critical interactions that you need to measure to know the path of success and to know where people are dropping off and to be able to dig better into that.
Yeah. And I think let's try to think about what those things are, and we're going to do that in plain language. So I wrote viewed page, which sounds like an event, but we're actually just going to write these in terms of how we think about them as maybe a user or as the product folks on this team.
Yeah.
Okay, so we know we want attracted people see this page.
Mm-hmm.
What about, so the core interaction here before they get into their reservation is search, right?
Yeah, exactly. So you click into that search bar and then you get what can we help you find, right?
Yeah. So we're going to do start a search. We want to know, did they start a search?
Mm-hmm.
Anything else on that first step?
Not for our purpose, I think.
Yeah. Great. Okay. I'm going to zoom in here a little bit. All right. So the second step there, what's the next action that they need to take to move forward to our goal?
Yeah. So they're going to either interact with the CTAs here, find a place to stay or find an experience. And to me, this can just be a single event, for example. And then we also maybe want to look into, for the fall off, are people clicking back? And this is something that could be a single event for all of these stages. This is like a back button that you're interacting with. And we don't maybe need a specific back event for all of the stages in this search. Exactly.
We don't, what did you say? We don't need an event for all of the stages?
No, I'm saying we don't necessarily need different events. So we could just have a general, back interaction event instead of having back, click back on this page, click back on calendar page, right?
Yeah. 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 I mean, we basically just want to know, are people going forward or are they going backward? And we can talk about, in the next tier, we'll talk about how specific do we want to be with what pieces, because some pieces we might want to be more specific than others, and other things like going backwards might be more of a fat event.
Yes.
All right. So now we've gotten to our calendar view. This is our main thing that we're trying to gauge. Is this working? Are people using this to get their reservations? So we want to know, are people going forward? Are they going back?
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not sure if we need to measure the interactions with the calendar itself, because, does it really matter to know if you click the date and then did not go forward, or, does it matter? I'm not sure. What do you think?
I would lean towards no, because in order to move forward, you have to select dates.
Yeah, exactly. And you could also, one could argue that you want to know which states the user is choosing, but you can attach those as properties to the next action. When you are clicking forward, you can just know, what were the start date, the end date, what was the length of the period, and all of that. So you don't need to attach that to the specific date interactions. So you can just skip those.
And I feel like that would get so messy and really hard to segment on, but we won't talk about why right now. I think that it could, just because there's sort of an infinite amount of ranges you could put in there.
And also, when you're trying to figure out your dates, you do so many clicks. So this is going to be so high volume, right?
Yeah.
Thinking about the cost again.
I love a cost-conscious analytics. All right. Okay. So now we're moving forward. And we're looking at this next step. So you've selected your dates, and how do people move forward to get their reservation from here? So we have another search.
Yeah, another search. And the same here. I don't really care about how people interact with the the guests parts, unless there was something specific. If we had a specific goal around that, to to optimize that. But that's not our goal right here. So we only care about if people are going forward or if they are not going forward. So
I totally agree. And I think this is a good example of a thing that if you found that there was big drop off between these parts of your flow, you might go back and instrument that, right? To see like, oh, I wonder if it is something going on that screen.
Exactly. And I see there's also a skip button there. Oh, there's also skip for the dates.
Yes. So what do you think? I might put skip. Well, I don't know. Skip, interesting. So if you skip it though, you would just maybe not fire this event. That could be one thing. You could either track skip or you could track the fact that event didn't fire.
Yeah. So I think exactly. So definitely the event would not be fired if you did skip, but still people are going forward if you skip. So this is maybe
I think no.
Or perhaps you are going forward. You're going to the next step. You're not dropping off. And so maybe if we could frame, like once we get to the naming part, we could frame it as you are going forward. You're not clicking the search button, but you are going forward from this page.
Yeah.
And then skip could be included, and then we had a property. Did you actually add guests or did you actually skip them?
I love it. So both of these actions could be the same event, and we're going to name those in our next step. So I love that they both could be tracked as the person is moving forward, which I think is great and very tied to the user goal and the way that would be really working in real life, right? I'm still moving forward. I'm still looking for a res.
Exactly.
All right, we're here. We've searched for stays in Miami Beach, and we have some things to choose from for our reservation. What might we want to look at here? We want to know maybe how many listings loaded, like the fact that they saw listings.
Searches are very important in that way. So I think just getting search results, that is an important event as well. So because how many search results and the quality of the search results that you get is going to affect so much how you're going to continue and how you're going to go forward after that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. And so here you are on your reservation. And so you've clicked into something, and we have, again, move forward. Are they moving forward? Are they doing a reservation? Or are they going back?
Yeah. Is there anything else that is critical here? So I mean, another good thing to think about when you are working on tracking a product like this, like what is a critical thing or a good indicator for success? So is there anything else, for example, like looking at, scrolling through the pictures? Is it an indicator scrolling through all the pictures of the listing if you are actually going to reserve or not? So that depends kind of, you have to have a little bit of a product expertise, I think, to make a decision if that is critical enough for your case, right?
Yeah. And I think that's a great example of what would I do if I learned this data, right? Because it's really unlikely that Airbnb would just like remove all photos if they, right? But I think it could depend on your product maturity. For maybe a smaller company, they're not going to maybe take action on something so small as like, should we have 4 pictures or should we have 10? But a large company like Airbnb might, right? They might go, okay, what's the sweet spot? It's 8 photos or something like that. Definitely. So I think if we were doing this for a first pass, for a first release, depending on the size of our product and company, I might leave that out and then come back later. But that's a really good sort of like second layer of measurement, I think.
I think like also because our goal is not exactly to dig into that right here. Our goal is to look at the effect of the date picker and if people are reserving. So maybe that's not too important to track those interactions because this is maybe not a big part of the funnel, unless, like you mentioned before, if we see a big drop off there, then we maybe want to take a look at that specifically.
Yes, absolutely. All right, great. And then we've hit our last step. We want people to reserve.
Mm-hmm.
So hit reserve. We want to know, did people book it?
Yeah.
Or did they leave?
Or did they leave? Yeah.
And I think that's it. There's nothing else really to track here. I mean, we could look at what some of these details are, but again, I don't know if that's as important for our release goal.
Yeah, maybe, because this is a date picker release, so, the length of stay is maybe going to be important. What time of year is maybe going to be important for us as properties for this user action.
Yeah. All right, great. All right, so now we have this set of things that we want to track that's going to help us understand, did we hit the goal of our release? Are we getting folks through the critical path? And if not, where they might be dropping off along the way to our goal.
Mm-hmm.
In the interest of time, I'm wondering if maybe we move on to naming conventions, and then we can come back and do the Netflix example if there's some time. We wanted to show just a couple of different ways to do this, but I think let's look at naming conventions and finish out our Airbnb example first. All right,
let's do that.
I'm glad we're on the same page. Let us know what y'all think in the comments, or send us a Slack message. We're monitoring that too. And just in case you're joining us late, you can follow along with us at the righttrack.avo.app/tracking workshop. We have all the resources there and everything we're going over. All right, let's talk about naming conventions. Another thing we could nerd out on forever.
For sure.
Right. Or what's a naming convention?
Yeah, exactly. So naming convention is one of the most important things that you could kind of be aware of in your tracking, because naming conventions, they ensure consistency, and consistency is key to be able to understand your data effectively across products, platforms, and code paths. Even all the different sign-up buttons that you have all over, they are implemented with different tracking calls. So it's so important to have consistency between everything, between programming languages and everything. So I think my best recommendation that I would have around naming conventions is to study these three aspects very carefully: the structure of it, or the order of the object and action, the casing, and the tense. Pick one and stick with it forever.
Forever. You can never change naming convention.
Because okay, if you're going to change your naming convention, change it for everything, but just really, I would recommend having it consistent across everything, because your data is permanent. It's just a data point in your database or your analytics tool forever, and if you don't stick, I know it sounds dramatic, but it's true.
Etch it on your gravestone. This was my naming convention. Never change naming convention. I love it.
My gravestone is going to have like a really consistent naming convention. That is for sure.
Yeah, I think the key is keeping it consistent. Again, to assist your team, right? Both in the code base and also in your analytics tool when you're looking up events.
Exactly. So if you have it just really defined and everyone knows what naming convention the team is using, it's going to be so much easier to name events, because you know how it's supposed to look like. You just have to pick the words that are going to go in there.
Yeah. So to go through a couple examples, the first thing that we're thinking about is just the structure. So do you put your object first or your action first? The examples here are sign up started. So that's object being sign up. You might think of that as like part of your product area or a key interaction people are having. So for the Airbnb example, that might be reservation started. Or do you want to do the reverse? Started sign up. The first way makes it easier maybe to search for events. They stack sort of by product area or by object, right? Sign up started, sign up completed.
They order very nicely according to the object instead of the action, which is maybe not always. It's less connected to the ones that have the same action rather than the same object. So I have a preference for object action for this nice little ordering of the objects together.
Yeah. And I like action object because even though they don't order well, it feels more human. It's a little bit closer to what you might say out loud. The user started sign up.
I agree with that.
I think more people are defaulting to the first one, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think so. That's what I usually see. But I mean, there are different resources that recommend different things. So people are grabbing those. But I would say, according to what I've seen, object action is more dominant. But I haven't seen everything. So,
You haven't? I think, okay. You've
I
probably seen more than most of us. And then, then you want to think about your casing. So I have some casing here. There's more cases than this, if y'all can believe it. There's just a case for every season, every walk of life. So these are pretty self-explanatory. I think you can go with any case. What do you normally see, Thora, people using?
Yeah, I see a lot of proper case or title case in event names, but then there's a lot of snake case in property names. That is kind of the trend that I've been seeing. I like just having proper case for everything because it's human readable, and it's just, in the end, it's just strings. It doesn't really matter what you put in there because the computer, it always uses, it's just a string to them. I see that Alex likes the camel case.
A little camel case preference.
It's not a surprise because he's a mobile engineer.
No shade. I like camel case too. Yeah.
Yeah, camel. I'm not a fan of camel case. I would always, my preference would be proper case or title case, whichever, they're similar, and snake case. Maybe it's because I program mostly in Python. Maybe that's the reason. And Python is like a snake case land.
No pun intended. I love it. And then tense, present tense or past tense. This may seem obvious, but I've definitely seen people use present tense, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but it's a choice you can make.
Yeah, I agree. But here is where it's so easy to drift off from your from consistency because people just do what they feel like and what makes sense for them at the time. But if you align, all the team aligns, we're going to use past tense or present tense, then we're not going to end up with inconsistencies and duplicates. That's the worst part about different tenses and different casings for the same user actions. You're going to end up with duplicates.
Yeah. Don't we know that? Okay. So for our example of Airbnb, for our example release, we chose a naming convention, and we're going to apply our naming convention across what we just came up with to track. So for the structure, we're going to go with object action, sign up started, reservation started, onboarding started, right? That's object action. For casing, we're going to go with Thora's fave, proper case or title case. So every word has a title, has a capitalized letter, and there's a space in between. And we're going to go with past tense rather than present tense. So that's our naming convention. So what we're going to do now is go back through what we've defined that we want to track and name it, give it some I'll have to long press to unlock. I'm going to delete this and actually bring over what we came up with over here.
Hmm.
See if I managed to grab all that. And so we're going to go through and actually give our event and property names. Why can't I? Oh, I think this one might be locked as well. That's what I get for locking everything. There we go. All right. Oh. Did I lose some of my thing? I think my computer might be freaking out. They're there. They're just hiding. That's what I get for running Miro and a Twitch stream at the same time. All right. So we're back. We have the things that we wanted to track, and we just wrote them as we talked about them, right? Y'all heard we just were having a conversation. What are we thinking about? What do we want to track on the way to our goal of having people book reservations? And so thinking about our naming convention, thinking about our tracking principles, how do we strike that balance for reusable fat events and human language, right, that folks are going to be able to understand and get value from in the data set.
Yeah.
So we'll start here with our first thing. So we have viewed page here. So given our naming convention, we're going to flip this, right? We're going to put the object here.
Yeah. And this is a great example of what kind of a pitfall that a lot of teams get into is to have like a specific event for all of their pages. This is going to blow up your list of events that you have. So like I have a really like big preference on having just a page viewed event or a navigate event or whatever you want to call it. And then you have properties describing which page it is.
Maybe like path
Yeah,
or URL.
path. Yeah, and also like, you know, even if you want to have like a, you know, category or something like that, because a lot of you know, pages are usually structured in like you know, the high level navigation categories or something like that. That could also be useful.
Yeah, I love that. And then other things I've seen in here are like, you know, where did they come from? What was their referring domain? Or we have first UTM source in our data. So yeah, you can build that again over time with things that you find useful.
Yeah.
So we're going to fire page viewed as the event, and then path or URL or whatever you would choose to be what page they're looking at.
Yeah.
Okay, now we have search. So we have started search. So what's our object going to be there? I'm leaning
I would
towards
just say, yeah, search there. I mean, it also depends. Now I would think, are there different types of searches that you can do on this page? Do you have like one global search and then you have a, you know, search for accommodation? Or if you, for example, airlines, sometimes they have like a global search for their FAQ and like all of that, or the support things, and then they have a flight search. So that's also something to consider. But if you only have one search, then search is fine. Otherwise, you might want to be a little bit more specific if they behave like very differently.
Yeah. And I think about that in terms of how key those activities are for your business, right? So for Airbnb, if they had, you know, up to like 2 or 3 searches off of their main homepage, those feel like key activities for their business, right? Whereas like if it's like way buried down, it's like you don't maybe need those to all be their own thing.
I agree with that, definitely.
So because they have a global search here, I think we'll just keep it simple and go with search.
Yeah.
Started. Does that sound okay? Started.
That sounds good to me. I like to, so for significant flows like this. So this is like a significant flow for Airbnb, and this has a start and an end. So I usually like to have a specific event for the start of this significant flow. For example, for sign-up flows, for checkout flows, and things like that. To have start and then you have an end event or completed event or something like that. And then in between, for maybe less significant points in the flow, then you can consider having like a more fat event. So you have like a step completed or something like that.
Yeah, I love that, especially for like onboarding flows or a flow like this.
Yeah.
Similar to your preference configured example.
Yeah, because basically you're configuring your search there, right? So it's kind of um, the same principle.
Yeah. So to just put a cap on what you said about started and completed, sort of beginning and end of the flow, I think that's a great example of a reusable way to track to grow, right? To keep started and completed is something that you can use throughout your product, no matter what product area you're in. I'm curious for this flow, since it's search, would you do search completed? And if so, where would you put it?
I would do search completed when you click the search button that delivers the search results. And then I would also probably have something about getting the search results, because that is also really significant for searches, because it depends on how you configure search, how many search results you're getting and the quality of them. And that is highly dependent, or like that everything that happens after that is highly dependent on those results.
Yeah, search is such a key interaction here for our goal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So search completed here, which is like you're triggering search, right? Whether you, as we talked about before, whether you skip or you hit search, you're still moving forward to get results.
Yeah.
So we'll put that there. And then you're saying put an event on the view.
Yeah, search result viewed. I think that's good. And then probably like search result interaction, something that indicates that you're interacting with a search result, because you want to also know that. Or it could be like a search detailed viewed or something like that. It depends on how you want to name it. But at least something that indicates you're interacting with the search results, because that is what like the intent of the user and the high level user action.
It's going to be hard to overlap this here.
Mm-hmm.
There we go. Okay. So search result clicked or something like that. Search result.
Yeah, clicked. Yeah, that's good. I have
to avoid clicked, right? Because it's like,
yeah, I agree. I kind of have a preference towards interaction, but that's a really difficult word because it's not really a verb. So you have like, even though interaction is kind of an action, it's really not like the word isn't that. But I have an exception for the word interaction in my tracking plans, and I use that a lot. Maybe it's because I'm not an English native speaker, and but I like using that. Search result interaction is something that I would have a preference towards instead of clicked.
Interesting. Okay. I think I'm going to leave clicked because of our naming convention for past tense, but that's a really interesting flag. And I think I like to avoid clicked because it is really generic.
I agree. Another thing with interaction is that it could mean other stuff than clicking it. It could be dismissing something, for example. So, for example, when you have a pop-up, then I often do like a pop-up interaction, because the interaction could be either clicking the CTA or dismissing it, for example. But that also, then you're including events in your path that are not in your desired path, right? Because you don't want people to dismiss things. So it's just different ways of doing it. But I think stick with search result clicked there. I'm sold.
Cool. Yeah, I think so, because it's on our critical path, right? They have to do that in order. It's one of our goal markers on the way to reservation.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's do our events going back through. So we have our search started and search completed. So that's our little loop there. And to your point, Thor, we have some stuff in the middle that we want to track, but it's like not really our critical path. It's just, are they going forward? Are they going back? They don't maybe need, these are fat events perhaps, rather
Yeah,
than
maybe
shallow.
like a search configured or search preference set or something like that.
I like search configured. I think that's cool.
Yeah.
And it's only 2 words, so it's nice and simple. Not too in the weeds. And then we might want to know some stuff about that search, right? So
Yeah.
we might want to know which
So
button they clicked.
yeah, which button they clicked and what like what was the context. So here we want to know, we're on this page, for example, or like what we can help you with context, and yeah, exactly which CTA they clicked.
Yeah. And so to avoid locking us into like the language of the CTA, or to Thora's point before, clicked button 3 or whatever, I think I might do something like type, because these are type of,
Yeah,
right? It's like a stay or an experience. It's like a category or a
I
type,
agree.
something like that.
And then if you want to dig deeper into what copy is working or what picture is working, because there are pictures on these events, then you can have button type, button name, button color, button, copy, whatever. You can add a bunch of context to that. But like high level, it's just, what was your path, right? You were going to click, you're clicking this because that leads you to this path, right?
Yeah. And I'm actually going to reuse your category thing, I think, because it's similar to what you had spoken about with page views, right? The categories here are likely mapped to their high level stays or experiences.
Yeah.
So we might be able to reuse that.
One thing I want to mention here, because now you have 2 category properties that mean different things. So here I would probably recommend having like a page category and a button category or something like that, CTA category. Because
I think they could mean the same thing. They could be the same. I don't know. They could be, right? Because category for pages could be product areas
yeah,
or stays or
true. At least this is something I would encourage people to think about. Like, how are the property values going to be? Are they going to be the same ones? Can you reuse them between those? Or do you need to be a little bit more specific so you don't, such that it scales better? So it's really, like a source is a perfect property name example that is used in so many different contexts. So it could be like where you came from, what is the source of the payment and stuff like that. And then it's just like really different things. And you can't reuse them across events, because in a lot of these tools where you can actually combine events and reuse properties across them, then you want to be able to know exactly like this property means this. It is about pages or payments or something,
Yeah, absolutely. You want to be really clear about what those values are going to be, because it can get really messy very fast. All right, well, awesome. I think we're going to leave it there. We didn't get to our Netflix example, but y'all can imagine how that would go. One thing Thor and I talked about was, the model for Netflix, rather than clicked or started, it might be played or paused due to the domain that they're working in and how that maps to what they're building.
Exactly.
Thora, any closing thoughts before we wrap it up?
I would say if there's one takeaway I would recommend people to take out of this session, is that consistency is key to useful analytics. So no matter what your design decisions are, just stick to them, and then you're going to be happy digging into your data.
Etch it on your grave. I love it. Consistency is key. I wanted to just mention to folks again, we have this page on the website. You can also get to it from the event listing, and you can find what we talked about today. The Miro board is here for your reference, the tracking principles and the naming conventions, along with a few articles to check out about tracking plans. And wanted to mention that we have some more upcoming events. We do a weekly conversation about data topics called Data Dish, which you can check out on Thursdays. And we're doing a fireside chat with Maura Church, who is the head of data at Patreon and is a guest on the Right Track podcast coming up. That episode's coming up next week.
And she's also really fun and really smart. So,
yes,
just to add.
Fun and smart and awesome. That's going to be great. And I'm actually going to play a trailer from the podcast as we wrap it up here. And I want to also let folks know about our Slack. So if you're not in our Slack, please come through and join us over there. And thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Thora, for all the great advice.
Thank you, Lex, for having me. It was fun.
Awesome. I'll see you on the internet.
Bye.
So much of my trust in data is having, in the past, worked with it, is having a mental model for what it looks like under the hood. I think that the way that this relates to how the product teams are working is it's just sort of a natural evolution as teams are getting pushed closer and closer to customers. They're closer and closer to these experiences.
I'm sure everyone has had a scenario where someone comes to you and says, I did this, but I don't trust it. And I think for a while, the way that we tackled that was as a technical problem. That's not wrong. It's both a data culture problem and a technical problem.
Building strong data literacy across the business is also helping people understand what has changed over time. Part of folks coming in and learning to trust the data is understanding hey, these aren't actually 20 different definitions of the same thing. They're different flavors that correspond to different ways to understand the business.